Good afternoon. This is Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO and Chief Security Officer of Tabernacle Technology Solutions. And today we are going to be talking about some pretty stellar news in the world of cybersecurity. Stellar as in it's big news, not good news. For those of you who haven't heard, right now, as it has been for many years, ransomware is in the news, particularly with, and I have to say this is probably my favorite ransomware gang named the Clop ransomware gang. So what's going on? Well, let me go ahead and share that source. Extra camera. One second here. So I'm looking right now at an article written by the bleepingcomputer.com. And long story short, what we're seeing is using a vulnerability in the software called MoveIt. Clop has ransomwared a significant amount of public organizations. And just to give you an idea of what MoveIt was something where you just securely share something on the cloud. It was you could go ahead and put files on a website or send files back and forth securely. It was used for compliance reasons and all other kind of stuff. So this is kind of a big deal. It's the number one secure file transferring software and storage software, I believe, at this point. And let me kind of read here what Crowell is saying. So here it is. I had to find where I could share my screen. So what is MoveIt? Let's start there. MoveIt is based on a little description from this legal firm right here. Is used to securely transfer files between parties, and Clop reportedly compromised MoveIt using a previously unknown zero-day vulnerability. Organization, and then if we go over here to bleepingcomputer.com, oh shoot, I haven't, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm getting used to Restream. Let me share this. Aha, here we go. So MoveIt right here is used to securely transfer files between parties. It's basically what the software does. It lets you securely transfer files on your websites or cloud servers or whatever. It's pretty popular and it's used all over the place, including on the federal government. However, if we go over here to see who has been impacted by this, Bleeping Computer actually has a great article about this. So let's look at this real quick. This is June 16th, so a couple days ago. The MoveIt transfer extortion attacks continue to dominate the news cycle, with the Clop ransomware operation now extorting organizations breached in the attacks. I'm going to skip down here. Known impacted organizations include U.S. federal agencies, the Louisiana and Oregon DMV, Zealous, BBC Boots and Aer Lingus, Ireland's HSC, the University of Rochester, the government of Nova Scotia, the U.S. state of Missouri, the U.S. state of Illinois, the Bourne or Ontario Ofcom and Extreme Networks, and the American Board of Internal Medicine. And that's just from the past couple of weeks. As for Clop, they have listed 37 organizations impacted by the MoveIt breaches on their website, hoping that it'll make these organizations pressure them into negotiation. So it's a big deal, right? Ransomware is a big deal, and this particular vulnerability has just shown how susceptible organizations are to the threat of ransomware. MoveIt is not a small software. It's actually pretty popular. It's used in a lot of different things, and as I was looking at it before, I believe it is the number one file transfer software. Let me just pull this up real quick. Yeah, it is the leading, according to IP Switch, it is the leading secure managed file transfer software used by thousands of organizations around the world to provide complete visibility and control over file transfer activities. So this is a SaaS product. This is something that you can use, whether deployed as service in the cloud or on-premise. It can be a SaaS, I should say. MoveIt enables your organization to meet compliance standards, easily ensure the reliability of core business processes, and secure the transfer of sensitive data between partners, customers, users, and systems. So this stuff is used for regular businesses, and it's used for web traffic. It's used for all kinds of things. And what's happened is if you use the service to store or transfer your files, Clop and other hackers I believe in theory, have the ability now to access it through this vulnerability. So they can, of course, ransom it as they have. They can take it for blackmail purposes, all kinds of nefarious things. Kind of really elaborates that no organization, no government, no nonprofit, no business is truly immune to the threat of ransomware and cyber attacks as a whole. It's an ever ending threat. So what are we supposed to do about that? Well, that's a great idea. My personal opinion is information is power. It's what I've built my business on. You knowing what is out there and what your actual risk is crucial to you knowing how to protect yourself. So let me explain. I'm a big proponent of cybersecurity risk assessments. I'm a big proponent of them. Why? Because everyone's risk is different. Obviously, there was risk here that with this MOVEit software and for US governments that in theory, if they had known before in advance, they could have better protected themselves against it. I think you having knowledge to know what your risk is and make proactive actions on it is critical to the success of protecting yourself from cyber attacks and cyber hackers. I mean, this is a pretty obvious question, but the question today that comes to mind when I talk about measuring cyber risk is, does ignoring a threat make it go away? My personal opinion is no, and I'll lead with that. But in the next 20 minutes, you can decide for yourself. Things really have changed. Let's just start there. We're talking about the US governments, the government of Nova Scotia, the government of Missouri, all being impacted by one group of criminals, being held hostage by one group of criminals. I mean, ransomware, the leading word in ransomware is ransom. Things have changed in our world. A group called CLOP can cause distress to the world's most powerful government, and by extension, other governments as well. Cyber attacks are going up. Year by year, we keep seeing this stuff in the news, and there's a reason for that. Cyber attacks are increasing year by year, and you can see here this little projection here where we're expecting the cost of cybercrime, where it was about $3 trillion in 2015, it's going to be over $10.5 trillion in 2025. How susceptible is your team to enabling and furthering cyber attacks, and how will you respond? These are all questions you will need to answer, as well as how many attacks will hit your business, if not today, tomorrow, or the day after that. Obviously, stuff happens. Things are unpredictable, but the more knowledge that you have, the better you can plan. Wire transfers, identity impersonation, ransomware, business email compromise. Every day, new tactics are invented by cyber criminals around the world. Case in point, we're talking today about CLOP and MOVEit. Someone invented a way to utilize a popular software called MOVEit to facilitate cybercrime, which will cause monetary damages to the organizations that are impacted. Significant monetary damages. I mean, and just in 2021, we saw 5.1 billion breached records. We see how data breaches cause stress for the employees of affected companies. If you've worked for a company that's ever had a data breach, you'll know it is a stressful thing. It is time consuming. It causes emotional anxiety. And it's not like we're not already aware this is a problem. I mean, as early as the beginning of last year, Homeland Security was warning businesses to be prepared for cyber attacks from foreign states and actors. Some questions that I think are really important that every business should ask themselves, and this is sort of a contextual question. First question is, what's the difference between a breach and a compromise? A breach and a compromise. Well, a breach, and it's kind of a little tricky of a question. I grew up in the era of public TV and seeing Saturday and Sunday movie days with James Bond, right? And in my mind, when I heard the word compromise in James Bond movies, I heard, oh man, bad stuff's about to start happening. Bullets are going to start flying. James Bond has been compromised. It is the worst, right? Like it's the pivot point of the movie. But in the world of cybersecurity, Actually, it's the lesser of two evils. Let me explain. Compromises happen all day long. Compromises happen to every single person in every walk of life in any kind of scenario. A compromise can be as simple as I said a little too much over a phone call to someone I shouldn't have. It can be I clicked something in an email I really shouldn't have clicked. Or I went to a website that I didn't mean to because I searched the wrong thing on Google and I opened something I shouldn't. Right? Like compromises happen. We're human. And if we learn from compromises and we do our best to be proactive about them, we're going to survive. The problem is if we don't do anything or we do insufficient remediation for compromises, then we end up in something called a breach. A breach is when you actually have serious holes in your security. A breach is when you're in the news because you've been ransomwared. A breach is bad news. Breach is the worst of two. A breach is when compromises have compounded to the point where it is not easy to fix or remediate or to get attackers out of your environment. It is a big deal. We don't want to be in breach land. You should ask yourself, how concerned are you about getting hacked? Seriously. Everyone has their own risk register. I think anybody on a scale of 1 to 10 to say they have a 1 is probably deluding themselves a little bit, for being candid. But ask yourselves, are you a 4 or are you a 7? Are you a 3 or are you an 8? You need to ask yourself now. Financial fraud is on the rise. We are seeing daily small businesses through their email losing significant chunks of money out of their checking account. Fun fact, financial fraud, wire transfer fraud, is not covered by the FDIC. That is all private insurance, and you have to have very specific policies that cover that kind of damages. So someone can take 6 figures from your bank account on an ACH transfer, and if you don't catch it within 24 hours, and they've wired it offshore, say somewhere like Russia or somewhere else in the world, it's gone. It's really difficult to get back. I had to work with an organization earlier last year that lost over $115,000 through this exact scam, and they got, I think, 2,000 of it back from the actual wire transfer, and their insurance policy only paid around $15,000. A lot of people don't realize that their money, if it gets caught by a hacker, isn't covered by the bank. If a hacker got into your stuff, like these guys did, stole all your things, and then started posting on the dark web, again, like Clop does right now, like that's what Clop is doing, shaming you into paying them, how much would that impact your business? How much would it impact if they got a bunch of stuff like then belongs to them, payment information, client records, and just put it on the dark web? They can sell that stuff if you didn't know that. There's open auctions on the dark web for things like social security numbers, usernames and passwords, credit card numbers, even things as simple as Netflix accounts are sold on the dark web. And then the last thing is really just the big one. That's what Clop is leveraging here. How much, if you had to pay, how much would you pay to get your stuff back or to keep yourself out of the news? Right? Like there's a reason that most of these lists are governments right now. They can't easily not disclose this kind of issue. But there are plenty of other businesses that are going to be impacted by this. We're going to be hearing in the next few months be forced to disclose whether or not they paid, whether or not they were impacted in the first place, what was impacted. And that's a real question. How much would you pay to make it all go away? That's what Clop's business model relies on. Ransomware's business model relies on. Being small is not a defense. You are being targeted, even as a small business. Mom and pop shops are being targeted. Case in point, that story I just told you about the $100,000 and only 15 from paid back with insurance, or $115,000 with only a small portion paid back in insurance and a small portion covered in bank. That was done to a organization with less than 7 people on full-time staff. 7 people. Here's my challenge as a security professional, and I think this kind of illustrates the point. In 2019, a new malware strain was discovered every 4.2 seconds. Almost 93%, 92.4% of attacks are delivered via email. This number has actually gone up on average. The stats I have on this slide, I think the closer stats are closer to 207 days now. But it takes a long time to discover you've been breached. Case in point, even something as high profile as Clop, we just started hearing about it over the weekend in public news. This was done at the end of May. It took them 3 weeks to figure out and get public how bad things were. 58% of malware attack victims are now small businesses. It is officially shifted in favor of them, as based on these stats. 60% of small and medium-sized businesses go under within 6 months of a breach. Remember our terminology lesson, compromise versus breach. Clicking on any bad email is not necessarily a breach. Compromise. Being ransomware by Clop, yeah, you've been breached. And 26% of organizations, if they're in, sorry, didn't do that. Okay, 26% of organizations that suffer a breach, 1 in 4, almost a little over, just don't do anything different after it's happened. They pay the person or they get through it and they just keep going about their lives and they keep getting re-victimized. And yeah, these attacks are happening here in Columbus, Ohio. Google ransomware Columbus, Ohio. For a lot of reasons, I'm not going to go through specific stories, but you can see all the organizations that have been impacted, or cyber attack Columbus, Ohio. So how do you respond to this, right? Like, that's the big question. Great, it's scary. There's stuff happening. What am I supposed to do about this? That's probably the question you're asking, right? Like, how do I take control? How do I do something? How do I manage my risk? How do I discover my security weaknesses? Where do I even start, right? We know it's the hacker's job to steal your information, and they treat it like a job. Clop is more than just a gang. They are a criminal business operation. They are in it to make money. The security landscape has changed dramatically over the past year and the past few years as well. It's different than what it was even 5-6 years ago, and it's worse. Is it time to actually manage your risk? If you're one of those people who said just ignoring a threat, if I ignore this, it'll go away. And if so, what's your first step? You need to identify your current risk exposure. I am not one for fear of uncertainty and doubt. You need to have data to make a good decision on what, if anything, you should be doing about this problem. What I propose is we need to get the facts so you can make the right decision. And we do that through the vehicle of a cybersecurity risk assessment. What is a cybersecurity risk assessment, you might ask? Well, it is an assessment comprehensively of your business on how susceptible your business is to cyber risks. Things like how your staff respond to phishing emails or social engineering scams, any physical or procedural weaknesses that a criminal could exploit, what kind of stuff do you even have that could be risky or impacted by a cybersecurity event? It does require your participation. That's the biggest thing. The whole team has to be on this. There's going to be physical inspections. There's going to be system inspections. We're going to review the data if you use my firm for this kind of thing. Your executive team has to participate because this is a big deal. This is our current process, and I'm going to give this to you free of charge in this webinar. We sit down with the leadership of any company, organization, nonprofit, or government institution. We go through what security, if any, and policy they have now. If they have a physical environment, now sometimes they are cloud only, and that's fine, but if they have a physical environment, we're going to review it, make sure that things are kind of locked down and no one's using the word password as their password, for example, little things like that. But more importantly, key things like computers are locked, we're going through the physical environment, it's not easy to plug stuff in, et cetera, et cetera. Network review, that's an interesting one. Network is more than just a network, like a switch or a router. It is the SaaS platforms that you're using. It is Microsoft 365, Google Workspace. We're reviewing data transfers. That goes into the data review, right? Are you using cloud to store data? Are you using cloud to transfer data? Are you using cloud to access data? Do you have a local server? These are all things that go into the network and data review. We're also going to look at what, if anything, is up for grabs, right? If you have intellectual property that a criminal is going to try to exploit, like these Clop ransomware people are right now, we're going to make sure you know where it is and everywhere it is, and also to ensure that it has the appropriate security around it to keep it from being caught up in an attack like this, or at least try to protect it from being caught up in an attack like this. We're going to look at your users. We're going to look at what systems they're using. Shadow IT is a real problem. That's someone goes home and transfers a staff member, for example. I've had several companies that have done this where there is someone who uses Google Workspace for their email as a business, and their employee, without their knowledge, is taking data from their Google Drive and dumping it in their personal Gmail account, right? We want to make sure that's not going on. We're going to look at the dark web because criminals, cyber criminals, gather and proliferate on the dark web. They're selling, buying, trading, and posting stuff. I saw a picture just recently about January, so less than 6 months ago, of an accounting firm in Cincinnati. They just had their logo splashed all over the dark web, said, these guys don't care about cybersecurity. They're a joke, yada, yada, yada. Well, that accounting firm, to my knowledge at the time, had no idea that was on the dark web. That was relatively new information. And I do believe someone did end up reaching out to them and saying, hey, you're all over the dark web. You might want to, get your stuff together before somebody takes advantage of you. And then last but not least, we're going to look at your team behavior. How do they deal with things? For phishing is a real problem right now. Do they click on every link sent to them? Do they know to be street savvy about who they give passwords out to? These are all things we evaluate. We put this all into a nice little report and oral presentation. We have an organic conversation with your leadership team, and we say, or you yourself, you're the owner, and say, what do you want to do with this? And we'll help you find the path that works well for you to realistically address your risk and your realistic risk. Again, we're not about fear of uncertainty and doubt. We want data. We want to make sure that things are done properly and that you are addressing your unique risk exposure. Take action. That's my final call for today. Take action to keep your business or your organization as safe as possible. These cyber attacks are not going down. They're only going to continue to get worse. Everyone's getting impacted. I have seen way too many small businesses just have a terrible time, lose tens of thousands of dollars, have to lay off employees even. I've seen that happen as well because of the financial damages and operational damages that stuff can happen. You should see in the link below, I posted a link. If you want to schedule a free, and this is absolutely my free thing to you, a free one-on-one cyber strategy session, right? You just want to learn more with me. You can go to cyber.tabernacle.tech/cyber strategy session. Again, that's cyber.tabernacle.tech/cyber strategy session. Link is in the comments of this live stream on Facebook. Thank you everyone for your time. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe out there, manage your cyber risk, and be prepared.